Restoring Our City podcast, where we have candid conversations on today's topics to help connect our community. And I am here with probably one of my favorite influencers of all time, Jasmine Thomas. How do you like that title? Social media
It
influencer extraordinaire.
sounds weird, man. It sounds almost like pretentious. If you come to I don't think I've posted out of my personal Instagram for so long. I've been reposting either stuff from Rock or stuff from our college ministry at church.
Yeah, it's a weird thing, right? Because I was on vacation and went to a wedding and hanging out with friends. And I haven't seen some of these folks in a while. And one person came up to me and said, "Hey, I see that you're like a social media influencer now." And I couldn't have cringed harder. He's like, "Oh, those are great videos or whatnot." And I'm like, is that the first thing that comes to mind? That's so weird. And obviously, I don't think we are I wouldn't consider us an influencer. And I don't think that's our goal. I'm so glad, Jasmine, that you're not chasing clout or followers. Sorry, guys, no giveaways. But it's great.
Unless you keep watching us and we can make money off of this, I'd love to quit my day
There we
job.
go.
It'd be
Yeah,
great.
it would be great to just talk about the Bible and people. Yeah, it would be fun. So come on, guys, help us out. But in any event, like in all seriousness, we love doing this because the relationships and people that have actually messaged us. And I think even from our last episode, I loved some of the conversations I've been getting into. Jasmine, I know you get into these conversations and they're private, right? And like they're out of the spotlight. That's not stuff that we record, but it kind of maybe stems from these conversations. And I absolutely love that. And I think that's what propels us
Yeah.
to keep doing this. But it brings me to this topic, Jasmine, that we were talking about this week, the dangers of influence. This idea
Mm.
of influencers and social media and this concept and really this career path that a lot of people are pressing towards can be very dangerous. So I'd love to kind of
Yeah.
explore this, but like, have you ever been influenced into anything in terms of maybe buying something or making a decision? How have you been caught in that game?
Amazon and social media, and they're listening to us all the time.
Yep.
So the second you say something, it's popping up as an ad. I don't know why this is, but the city of St. Charles has to be sponsoring something because every single time I open up my Instagram right now, it's just like, look at St. Charles. Look at our downtown. You can live here. I'm like, why? I just moved, right? Like, why? What did I say about St. Charles? Why trying to get me over there? But
Like the suburb of
100%.
Chicago? Like,
Yeah, they are trying to recruit people. So if y'all want to move back, there's some phenomenal places right downtown right there.
I grew up in a town not too far away from there in Hillside, probably a town over or two. It sounds weird. Maybe things have changed, but wasn't a great place to go. So sorry, St. Charles is not going to be sponsoring this episode. But that's
Oh
interesting.
man.
Yes, I mean Amazon will tell you what to buy or what they think you should buy next, right? So there's the algorithm that's playing into what we want, what we desire. But I think it's really
Yeah.
dangerous, right? There's like good influences and good algorithms that help us with our shopping, but there's also like these dangerous components of it that can really be detrimental to people, especially in the Christian world, right? So,
Yeah.
like, when I think about like why this is important, I think today, especially in today's world, the digital age is so widespread. It's a part of our everyday life, and so especially in the Christian space, it just seems like it's a very crowded space too. There's a ton of noise, and like from your take, like why would you think this is important to kind of bring up in terms of like the dangerous components of influence?
Yeah, I think right now there's just so many voices that are out there. I'm thinking, 10, 20, 30 years ago, even when social media really wasn't a thing, there was always a small group of people that were very influential, right? Like if something happened in American life, the first question is what did Billy Graham think about this, right?
Yeah.
What does this other individual think about this? People that have passed on are now with the Lord. But there isn't such a crowded space. Everyone is kind of looking to an influential person to get a good take. Now it's the second something happens within 20 minutes, everyone's got a take on it.
Yeah.
Whether you should be influential, whether you shouldn't be influential, it doesn't matter. Everyone has a take on what it is. So the crowding of the spaces makes it really hard to know, like, what should I be listening to? What should I not be listening to in terms of, any sort of influence on anything?
Yeah. And us included, right? It's like, well, we have this
Yeah.
podcast, we have this platform. And I even think before we had the podcast and before we had, something on the internet. We did events and things like that, and especially when we wanted to create an idea, that people would come up to us and say, "Hey, I think you should do this," or "I think we should get the city together to do something," right? And there was this platform that allowed your voice to be heard. And I think the barriers to entry are really non-existent now, especially with the internet. Everybody can write a blog. Has a podcast. Um,
Yeah.
but also, like to your point, there are some credible voices that we would hear, and I think that's what I want to unpack, because influence can be a very dangerous thing because there are so many voices out there. And how do we tell, especially the people who are listening right now, should you listen to us? Should you listen
No.
to the voices that are out there? You're just shaking your head. No, you shouldn't. You sh-
No, no,
don't
no.
listen to us.
Don't listen to us.
But how do you
I'm just
decide?
kidding. Why else would we be doing this unless we wanted? You know what? I take it back. Joby and I always talk about
Yeah.
this. We record this for us. The fact that you're listening to it is we just want to converse with each other. We just put a mic in between.
Yeah.
It should you listen to this or not? You should be able to discern and tell us whether we're credible or
Yeah,
not.
and to all the people who have messaged us for random things and words of encouragement, I definitely appreciate it. And there is an element of truth to that, Justin. But I think there is also an element that we do want to put our voices out there, because
Yeah.
not that we are credible in terms of like, wow, we're this amazing influencing type of personality. None of that. I think God's worked in our hearts enough, with enough evidence, that we feel like we should share some of those examples and those stories to
Yeah.
have those conversations. And I think what I really want to unpack is, what should we be listening to, right? How do we
Yep.
discern things, right? Um, because it's a crowded, crowded, society with a lot of voices, but there's also a lack of authority and accountability, especially if you could just grab a microphone and order it off Amazon and just start talking into
Yeah.
it, right? Like, why is
Yeah.
that dangerous when we don't have the authority and we're not all Billy Grahams, right? Like, why is that a dangerous aspect to this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about a lot of prominent Christian failures that we've seen
Sure.
often, people that we would consider influencers in their own right. And the second something happens, there's this mass devastation of like, oh my gosh, I can't believe X, Y, or Z person did this, but they seem like such a strong Christian. And one of those things is like, well, how much do we actually know them? We
Yeah.
heard the things they said. We know we were influenced and impacted by them, but how much do we actually know them as an individual at all? And I think that's maybe we'll jump into some application here, but really discerning like how much weight should you attribute to someone you hear online is definitely a question we should start asking. And the influence is real, right? I mean, I think about even in sports, right? Like the second, me, Joby, and one of our friends, Toby, shout out to Toby. He's dying out in New York as a Bulls fan, but at the same time, any single time something happens to the Bulls, we are riled
Yep.
up in our group text, ready to go because we are absolutely influenced by everything that this team does. We get emotional about it, and none of these guys knows us, right? Like the
Right.
front office has no idea who we are. But you know what? We are influenced by them 100%.
Completely. How does a box score that just pops up as a notification on my phone determine the mood of my entire night, right? And it does, and it's so sad and unfortunate. What a great example. And I don't
Yeah.
think it's getting any better anytime soon, which is why
No.
we should not put as much value in the kings and the men, right? Like what in the horses. Don't put our trust in any of that stuff, right?
Yeah.
So like, this is such an important topic, because there are people that are out there sharing their voices, and some should be, some probably shouldn't be. But I think it's so important too, because of the dangers and maybe some of the mistakes that people are going through, and then they are searching for an answer, right? And so what do? They're scrolling on their phone anyway, and they hear this really prophetic word, or they hear this like motivational music on a clip, and they're like, wow, this is what God's calling me to do, right? And like, there's not a lot of testing and discernment on those voices. And I think that's why this is so important too, because social media and these platforms can be very influential and inspiring to some degree. But there's people really going through stuff, right? And sometimes they don't know where to go. So they go to the internet and they go to their phone and go to these popular people to get advice. I don't know if you've seen
Yeah.
that before or have done it. I feel like I've done it myself. Like, I need to hear a message today. So I'm going to go and like look up a sermon or something like that. Right. And sometimes that's
Yeah.
good. Sometimes it can be dangerous. Right.
Yeah, and again, there's so many people making a career out of this, right? You
Yeah.
think about political commentators, sports commentators, people that wanna have influence in a space and an arena, and even all of us, if you have a social media account and you've reposted something from someone else, you are in some ways influencing the audience that's in front of you. We're all de facto influencers, maybe to varying degrees. But this really is it's such a prominent issue that we should all think about because of that reason alone, right? Like with digital communication and how we're all interacting with one another, how much weight we even try to get other people to see, our point of view right now. It definitely think it's something we should all be thinking about. Like
Yeah.
what does it mean that we have an influence, with the people that we know?
Yeah, there's like a responsibility to it too, right? Like I don't think we think about that enough. And yeah, you're probably posting random things and that's great. Like about your kids or your family or your vacation or whatnot. But like I don't think we understand the reach that it has. And this could be dangerous too, right? Like there's an influence and there's like a positive influence to some of these things, but there are components of this that can be dangerous. And I think that's why we want to unpack this today because as the noise gets louder and louder from these like creators, and I think we could throw ourselves in there too, right? Like, we're
Yep.
not, discounting ourselves or putting ourselves above this, but like there should be an accountability here in terms of um, having people share advice and sharing um, knowledge, especially from the Bible. If you don't have any background in it, and like I see a lot of stuff on like TikTok and stuff, there people are like, man, I just became a Christian yesterday, and here's some of the things that I want to tell you about. It's like, wait a minute,
Yeah.
what? Like that's so crazy. And some of it's like this authentic, like, hey, I just want to let you know I'm navigating my story through this, and I'm like,
Sure.
okay, that makes sense. But like then there's like advice, and I'm like, wait a minute, what if somebody's just watching this, does not know anything about Christianity, and you just became a Christian yesterday, and you're like touting all of these things that you know, right? Um,
Yeah.
but people can be so manipulated by that, right? And I think that's
Yeah.
dangerous. Um,
Yeah.
but there's also like the weight of influence too, right? Because like you mentioned years ago, you got a couple people that just look up to, but like it used to be a select few. We could kind of look at some of these prominent Christian leaders and like the voices of reason, but now that's kind of been distributed across the board. And like it's really hard to put stock into what people say, character flaws, mistakes, things like that. And it's like, wait, should I listen to this person? And I think people who aren't, spiritually mature or haven't been a Christian for a very long time can get dissuaded and then throw out all of Christianity. And I think that could be a very dangerous thing because they don't know who to
Well,
look to, right?
it's even from, you go back to, and I always think about this with Billy Graham, right? I think because I think he understood that, hey, people are really looking up to me. He felt the weight of responsibility to be very intentional with what he did.
Mhm.
And I always think about this example, when Bill Clinton had been caught in his own affairs and scandals, Billy Graham decides after the fact to attend a rally and even sit, I think, at the same table as Bill Clinton. And everyone around the space is like, dude, like, what are you doing? Like, how can you go and support this guy who had been caught? And Billy Graham said this quote, and then it was more on the side of like it's like the Holy Spirit's thing to convict, it's God's job to judge, and my job is to love.
Mm.
And you can tell that response was very well thought out, and he put a lot of stock in knowing that people are going to react to this. What is the message gonna be? And that's something that I think he thought. I think nowadays when we think about influencers and even people that we just want to get a message out as quickly as possible, there isn't really that scrutiny or responsibility I see anymore in making sure that message is right. I mean, we see it all the time with misreported media all the time, right? Like where we would just need to get the thing out first, but we don't really take that responsibility to make sure we get that thing out right,
Right. Yeah.
right? And that's one of the problems right now we're seeing in this space. It's very diluted. People aren't looking to certain individuals to get that voice heard, which could be a good or a bad thing. But really, the responsibility and the weight that we put behind the words that we're saying is something that we all have to take stock of and scrutinize a little bit more.
Yeah. Like, why do you think they're so quick to jump on this? Right. I think
Yeah.
I put my marketing hat on, right? Of course, you're first there, first to break the news. Most people are going to be quoting you and citing you as the source. And people are probably getting you put more eyeballs and likes and retweets or whatever it is now, right? Like
Yeah.
on that. So it's less about quality, it's more about volume, more about attention. And
Yeah.
that's so dangerous, right? Like especially if you're reporting something in terms of news, but then also like to have our take on it, right? I think about, you know, that Coldplay incident. We talked about this on a prior episode. And people really jumped on it really quickly. And they also started making judgments about a person in that video that was like a third person who wasn't really a employee, but they made assumptions and then they doxed them
Sure.
completely, right? Like that's so dangerous that the fact that we have this capability now, right? Um,
Yeah, I mean, we saw a lot of that sometimes with, different racial issues that we've seen in this country where we're quick to jump on a story and make judgments. We've even seen this too in so many like political arenas as well. But I think the verse that always comes to my mind from the Bible is to be quick to listen and slow to speak. But we're completely doing this in reverse. We're very quick to speak and slow to listen or slow to scrutinize, get our thoughts right, make sure that what we're saying is accurate. And I think that's probably one of the marks of who should be an influencer,
yeah.
right? It's not the person that speaks the quickest. It's the person that puts the most thought into it and speaks the most correctly about an issue. Even the quality of the content, sometimes I think about it, it's like, what is everyone really saying, right? Like, if we just pause for a minute and listen to some things, sometimes you're like, dude, what are we even talking about here? It doesn't make any sense if you just think about it for 5 seconds. And unfortunately, I think it's also just, I mean, such a volatile place, the internet. So even trying to react to it in a rational way may get you canceled.
Yeah.
So there is just such an interesting thing to navigate. But yeah, definitely a cesspool of the
Yes. Yeah.
worst kind of.
So the internet is a wild place. There's a lot of bad takes. There's a lot of crazy things, and it's dangerous, right? And so, from a
Yeah.
listener point of view, if you guys are listening and you're like, "Wow, I want to get something out of community or learning about Christian perspectives on some of these things, and maybe even our experiences," it's like, how can we actually discern better? Like, what should we be listening to? How do we practically, apply the way we should be listening, right? Like quick to listen. How should we listen? How should we actually tune out the bad influences and really listen in and lean into the right ones? I mean,
Yeah.
the word that comes to mind is like discernment. And man, I feel like growing up as a Indian Christian, especially at church, it was like, all right, you just really got to discern or you got to listen to the voice of God. Like, just man, go to your room, close the door, just listen and hear his voice. And a lot of that has been so generic advice. And it really just never made sense to me. Like, I'm actually listening for the audible voice of God. But how do I
Yeah.
spiritually discern and like how do we unpack that, right, Jessamine? From a like
Well,
a
I was
biblical
thinking,
perspective.
right. Well, even thinking about growing up, right? Like the second a prophet comes into town, it's like, "പ്രവാചകൻ ഇവിടെ വന്നു, so convention ഉണ്ടാകാൻ പോകുക, everybody go into the front and pray." It's like, oh my gosh, like he's about to say something profound. It's like, ah, dude, like you're gonna be blessed. I'm like, okay, cool.
Yeah,
The
cool.
last 10 people said that. We're supposed to give you money for this, or what are we doing, right?
So, did you know your name means Jesus wins? Like, did you know that?
Yeah, dude.
Yeah. Man,
Not to just kind of like, oh, let me backtrack a little bit. There have been some legit prophets that are out there, but
yes.
hold up a second. Whenever we talking about that terms of discernment,
Yes.
especially in the cultures that Joey and I grew up with, sometimes it would be reduced down to like, let's just go to someone that's really gifted and they'll discern
Yeah.
for you rather than taking the weight of responsibility to learn. Like, what does discerning the will of God mean?
That's the huge part of it. I think yes, we don't want to be we have another episode on the Holy Spirit if you want to dive into that one. But I think it's just that fact, just when it's like we don't teach people how to discern. We just rely
Yeah.
on somebody that and maybe that's the influencers back in the day. It was the traveling prophet that would go visit to all the churches.
Not even back in the day, man. Like you think about nowadays, I know friends of mine that know what John Piper said about the Bible more than they know the Bible itself. All right. So there's legitimately, and I'm not saying John Piper's a bad influence. I'm not saying Tim Keller's a bad influence, but the amount of people that flock to a very small amount of voices is incredible, right? Like we're not learning discernment. We are listening to other people that have discerned what the word says and listening to it from like a secondhand source is really where it's coming from.
Yeah.
And in some senses, that's probably how we can think of all influencers, right? Christian, non-Christian, whatever else. We're listening to someone else's discernment on a take
Yeah.
of something rather than thinking through like how would I discern the source material itself, right? But
Yeah.
anyway, I digress
No,
there.
but that's like exactly it. I feel like we trust in those people enough to unpack the Bible, to do our Bible reading for us, to pray through it. And like, of course, John Piper has been a huge influence on my life. I do not know the man, right? Um, Tim Keller, I met Tim Keller one time, and I was in line to have him sign my book. And the line was super long. We let somebody cut in front of us, me and my brother Joel. He can attest to this. We were so nice because you know what? Tim Keller preached about the gospel. I learned so much about the gospel and about how to be sacrificial. We let this lady
Yeah.
cut in line. Guess who was the last person to get their book signed? That lady who cut in line.
Wow.
And Tim Keller was so nice. He's like, sorry guys, they're telling me to go. That was my only interaction with Tim Keller. And not that I cared about getting an autograph, but it was just like, I'm just being facetious, but like he's been a huge influence on my life, but I don't know the man. But like we trust that he's been through all the biblical scholarship that he and I do, and I rely on a lot of the stuff that he says too. But it's more than that is like he's probably put my faith in scripture even more, right? And I think that's
Yeah.
how do we balance that, right? Like yeah, I'm a fan in a sense, but also what do I take from those influences to help me be a better mature Christian, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if we had to practically break this down for everybody listening, like there's probably voices out there that we shouldn't listen to, maybe some that we should, but how do we discern what to listen to and not just rely on the next fasting prayer at your church, right? Like what could you do now
Yeah.
to help you discern? Um, Jess and I do talk about this stuff before we actually record, believe it or not. And we actually did come up with a couple of scriptures that we wanted to take a look at. Jessamine, I know you brought this up. Romans 12, verse 2, which is, if you've grown up in church, probably have heard this verse a million times. But I think this is a really good one, right? I appeal to you, therefore,
Yeah.
brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. That's 1 and 2. I want
Yeah.
to provide the context there. But right when you hear that verse, like that unpacks a lot of stuff about specifically that by testing you may discern what is the will of God.
Yeah.
There's a lot to
Yeah.
unpack there, Jessamine. But what do you think when you hear that passage?
Well, I was gonna say I love that you added the context there, but because in the first verse of Romans chapter 12, it says, your responsibility is to present your bodies as a living sacrifice to God first and foremost. And I think a lot of us, instead of doing that, we're presenting our bodies, our minds to so many different things. We are presenting it to influencers, we're presenting it to what we're gonna see on TV, we're presenting it to so many other places, but we neglect that first responsibility, like present it to God as a holy and acceptable sacrifice first. And then guess what? As your mind is being renewed, then you may be able to test and
Yeah,
discern what the will of the Lord is. So, it's almost kind of like, when I was thinking about that, going back to the source, right? Instead of listening to the commentary about what the Bible says, do the part about, presenting yourself first before the Lord, not through a commentary, not through someone else, not through this podcast. You go to God first. And then come through in one of the questions I guess we have to ask and unpack here is what does it mean to be transformed by the renewal of your mind before we can actually test and discern. So that's I guess a question I'll toss back to
yeah,
you, like we're presenting ourselves before the Lord, how do we renew our mind?
yeah. I mean, set our minds on things above in Colossians. I think that's the first verse that comes to mind. And like, how do we actually be transformed, right? I mean, think about the story of Nicodemus and like, what does it mean to be born again? Like, how do I truly
Yeah.
be transformed? Like, throwing away the old man and becoming a brand new person. Um, I think that's such a powerful, I guess, imagery when we think about being a new creation. it's like transforming your mind, which controls everything in us, right? Like, which means we have to be completely transformed from the inside out. So, not to get overly spiritual on this, but like, man, if we let the word of God and like the gospel transform us completely, then it allows our mind to be renewed. And so, like, with that true understanding, to be like a believer first and foremost, like, I don't think we can test and discern the will of God without being a believer, right? So if you're not
Hmm.
a Christian and
Yeah.
you're listening to this and you happen to be upon this, and yeah, you're probably not going to have your mind renewed like that, right? Um, but I think secondarily is the aspect of being a mature Christian. And so, like, even this whole topic of like being influenced, I think about us, like, especially for those of us who might be easily swayed, and maybe this is a little bit of a tangent, but I don't know if you agree with this. But like a lot of the church hurt noise that I hear, which is
Mm.
totally legitimate. Like people have been hurt by the church. But when I hear reactions of people saying, well, this is why I can't be a Christian, because look at this. And they point to an example of like church hurt. I'm like, aren't you throwing the whole religion out because of one influential person's mistake? Are you putting all of the
Hmm.
stock of the faith itself on this person? To me, that just means you're like spiritually immature and you may not be trusting in God. You're probably totally influenced by a person more than you actually think. I don't know. Is that
Yeah.
way too out there or too controversial, or what would you think about
No,
that
I, you
statement?
know, well, it almost comes back to, well, I guess one of the ways that we have to define it is, what does the Bible call like an influence, right? And the only way that I can really think about it is teacher, right? Like there is someone that's influential, someone that is teaching others to be there. And one of the things that the New Testament really says about teachers is, not many of you people should be teachers. Not many of you people in other ways should be influencers, because the weight of influence is something that people should like. It's not something natural to us, for all of us to be able to bear the responsibility of a gift
Yeah.
like this. So when you hear examples like that, Joby, that you're talking about, it's like, hey, yeah, I do think there's part of it where there is some immaturity, where you put all the stock in a person rather than in God, right? Who's able to really take the weight of that. But on the flip side of that, it really talks about like, man, maybe we do have some immature people that shouldn't be influencers, because the impact of their failure impacts so many people. And we've seen this time and time and time again. And something that's, I think, near and dear to my heart right now, I'm seeing such great activity pop up within like our younger Indian Christian space, some renewal movement, some people really rising up the ranks. And one of the things I'm always kind of worried about is, man, we saw an entire wave of people that have done this before, and then we start seeing failures that come after, because there isn't this undergirding of trying to be mature in their private life. It's really, I'm chasing my, not really chasing the influence, but when you become influential, it's almost hard to do the things you need to do to take care of yourself, because sometimes the weight of your influence has surpassed the maturity that you needed in order to bear that responsibility. I don't know if you have
Yeah.
a response to that.
No, it's such a huge topic. It's so relevant today because it's so popular now today to be a Christian and an influencer, right? Like I saw a post the other day about like how Christian even songs like Forrest Frank, like number one on the
Yeah.
charts and like billions of streams, billions of views. You're talking mainstream media like the George Janko or Girls Gone Bible or whatever that is. It's like all these podcasters like have these platforms and they're actually influencing at the mainstream level, right? And so then
Yeah.
you wonder about and I'm not throwing any shade, not like anybody's going to listen to this, but like any shade at those people, right? Like they say that they shouldn't have a platform or not. But like we have to think about the spiritual maturity of some of those people. I, I'm reminded of like Hebrews 5:13 and 14. For everyone who lives on milk is unskilled in the word of righteousness since he is a child. But solid food is for the mature, for those who have their powers of discernment trained by constant practice to distinguish good from evil. That's
Yeah.
maturity aspect is like written in there to understand. I know the context of that chapter is about apostasy and like how do we like make sure we're not listening to false teachers, right? And thinking about this, but so relevant today, right? Like how do we know we're not listening to false teachers? even though it might sound good, but like, are we actually listening to people who are spiritually mature, eating solid food, have practices of spiritual discipline? Um, it's really hard to gauge that. And I think there's might be some practical steps, right? Like I mean, to me, like when you say some of these examples of people who are like rising in our culture, I think that's great. I love that. And I highly encourage it too. Um, and I think we just have to make sure that we're not always putting stock into like, hey, Joby said this on a podcast or Justin said this on a podcast. So this is how I'm going to live my life. Well, that I'm great. And please keep reaching out to us. But at the same time, look for other things outside of just like the social media influence, right? Like, are you reading your word? Are you praying every day? Are you part of a local church? Do you have discipleship? Do you have wise counsel? Do you have some of these things? I think that all needs to be focused in the practical application of discernment. Um,
Yeah, and even kinda going back to maybe Romans chapter 12 there, especially in verse 2, like, you're able to discern what is good, acceptable, and even perfect, right? And I think, like, the way that I'm reading it is there's almost different levels or there's some distinguishing that's there, right? Like, good being in line with the character of God, perhaps. Maybe what's acceptable is when we do things that are in line with the character of God, and really perfect being like we are in line with, like, what God really wills, like, for our life. So there's some differing degrees there. And sometimes when I think about social media and influencing in general, there are some influences that you might pick up from social media that are good, but really from what should be influencing you more, right? Like, how do you determine what's acceptable, right? Like, maybe you hear about someone in like your local church community. It's like, hey, guess what? Like, they seem like they're really living in like the will of God. Like, maybe they should be a pretty good influence. And hopefully we platform those people. And then really when you get to something like a one-on-one discipleship mentorship, sure, we'll never be like Jesus, but I love how Paul puts it in one of his letters, right? Like, follow my example as I follow Jesus. What a great gutsy like statement. But really when he opened up his life to scrutiny, I think he probably felt the weight of his influences. Like, I'm going to try to be as like Jesus as I can be, right? Like, in the way that I pray, in the way that I teach, in the way that I'm discipled, in the way that I disciple others. And really, hopefully, that's where you're most influenced by someone that you have access and you're looking at their life. You're able to ask them about purity. You're seeing the ways that people influence them and others. You're really living life with them. Those should be the voices that influence you the most. And hopefully a podcast voice like we have right now should be acceptable in some way, shape, or form, but
yeah.
definitely don't cross a threshold beyond where it should be. Unless you know us.
Yeah.
Then maybe,
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 yeah.
maybe a little bit more.
Well, I think that's a great example, but it makes me think about why are people even looking at Paul? Like when I look at the reactions of some of the letters that he got, like you see these people who are like in Philippians or just people who are so generous, so loving, and they react to him in this such a positive manner because he's been so influential to them and they respond accordingly. But man,
Yeah.
is there just an emptiness in society today that they're begging to look for an answer somewhere where they're like,
Mm.
I'm scrolling anyway. I'm hurting bad. And I've gotten these messages from people who are really struggling with things. They hear something on our podcast and by means all means, please reach out. If we need to point you to someone to get you some good advice, wise counsel, whether it's us, sometimes we can give that. Maybe it's outside of our expertise. We can find that. But like, isn't there that says something about our culture that people need a positive influence? They don't know where to look. And that's why these voices out there are so influential because we have a people looking to be influenced because they're lacking something, you know?
Yeah,
And
and I think we might have tackled this on, like, a previous episode, but I think one of the advents of social media right now is just a destruction of the fabric of our normal relationships, right? When you used to know your neighbors, right? You saw your teacher at a local grocer, you knew the kids in your neighborhood, and they're all playing outside on the park by themselves, and it was a very normal thing when you were 6, 7, 8 years old, no supervision of, like, an adult around. You had the fabric of society of going to church, you had these people that were committed to their local Lions clubs or Boy Scouts. There was this interconnected fabric, and those are the people that really influence us. When those things break down and we are very much to ourselves and we don't know where to look for, then we see this rise of an influencer title of what are you doing with your life and job? I'm just going to be here to influence others. Why? Because we've opened ourselves up to being influenced by voices that are so distant, because the people that are so close are actually the ones that are extremely far from us.
Yeah. And I think we just need to understand that we need to get back to that relational dynamic, which the church is built for. There's a lot of these mechanisms and these solutions built into what Jesus already preached for us, right? Like the creation of the local church and just the community aspect of those things. And, uh, we were talking a little bit earlier. It's like, what should we practically think about when we think about discernment and who should be those voices that we listen to? I think there are some great voices, theologians, prominent Christian scholars, great voices in the world to listen to. But at the end of the day, who should we be following? Following Christ, right? And that sounds like a great spiritual answer. But like what I even take out of that is that as much as I like to listen to a prominent author or influencer, I always have to like take a step back to be like, that person is a person and they have limits. And always understanding all of these people are finite. I was sharing with you before. I love this quote from John Calvin where he talked about human spiritual understanding is darkened, and he said people are blinder than moles. Like he was thinking about it, it's like, hey, people, no matter how much of scripture they can unpack and tell you about God, they are limited. And that's how much stock you should put into them. It's like, yeah, take it with a grain of salt, but how can I actually trust and understand what God is really saying about this? You know?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, yeah. But hopefully, the closer you are to their lives, maybe you'll see they're a little bit less blind, even though they're still blind. And hopefully, you'll be influenced by them more. I think one more thought that popped into my mind before, we sort of wrap this thing up is, there are people that should be influencers in our
yeah,
lives, and some of us that are a little bit older. When we look at especially the younger generation coming up, right? It's like, man, this person has a real knack for speaking and bringing people together. Or this person has a great gift for hospitality and they could really influence people within their home. I always think about like Priscilla and Aquila and Apollos, right? So there's this dude, Apollos, dynamic speaker. He heard a little bit of the gospel and he starts spreading. And what ends up happening is like, yeah, dude, Priscilla and Aquila come around, start hearing Apollos. Is like, bro, listen, you're on the right track, but you're not all the way there. Let me just sit you down and give you some advice, right? And they really brought him along to the point where later on, Paul's like, why are you guys just arguing about, hey, I listen to Paul and I follow him, I'm a disciple of him, or I'm a disciple of Apollos or someone else? Doesn't matter. At the end of the day, God gets all the glory. But you see that the influence that Priscilla and Aquila had on a young Apollos in saying, we see this gift within you, but let us help nurture it along a little bit so that your influence is undergirded by some maturity, some strength, some things that are going to help you along the way. And later on, Paul says, yeah, I'm
yeah,
cool with him being one of my cohorts. So why are you guys arguing about me and him? We're all serving Jesus and we should be good influences on you, right? So where's our responsibility in this? Like Joby, you, me, and others of us that are older and a little bit along, we have a position too to say like, hey, you guys are influential. We want to come alongside you and make sure that your maturity and you understand the responsibility really undergirds the impact that you have with
yeah.
your influence.
Man, it's almost like sometimes when we look at the numbers and like, how do I know somebody's influential? Well, not because of their character. Well, I think they're influential because I see their follower account or I see how many views this person has. And that makes you think, like, think about how you would connect with somebody, right? Like, are you more adept to connect with somebody if you're like, wow, they're famous or they have this great power or influence? I want to connect with them. And then you see somebody who has like 10 followers and you're like, I don't care about that. Like, that is that a right way to treat somebody? But like, if you got to
Mm,
know people and know that they have influence relationally, even if they don't have the clout, right? Like, it would be our responsibility to bring those people along, or you know what I mean? I feel like I think Paul didn't look at like the major influence of people and how much of a crowd they can bring along, but what's the potential of that person to spread the gospel? And how can I bring them
yeah.
along? How do we disciple people? How do we actually foster relationships and mold people? And not that they're not influential, or they might be bad voices, but how do we look at this redemptive aspect of people to say, no, I think you have potential. Come alongside. How do we platform those voices? I think back to our connector series that we just did a couple months ago, and man, like that's so great to see, right? Like people who have platforms, but like we want to just share that out and share some of these voices. They're doing some amazing things. And I think that's so powerful. It's such a great example of how do we bring people along? Like let's bring people together, not push people away. Um, but it's an interesting topic, man. Like I think this is it's a prominent one just because of the power of influence. But I think we just have to be aware of the dangers, but then also understand, hopefully for everybody listening, that there are practical ways to discern, and love to hear your feedback too. And Jeswin, cannot wait to drop our affiliate links to our shops and all of our clothing brands so we can share referral links to
Dude, you
everything.
can buy some rock rocks. It's great. I just picked them up from Home Depot yesterday. We'll ship them out to you. We got you.
Man, how dumb would that be if we actually just put a shop and it's just like Bible verses that we put on rocks and we like ship it to. I've seen people do that with potatoes and they make a killing. So maybe who knows?
Oh my
We need to fund
gosh.
these
We
microphones, guys. Like so.
uh
All right,
it's fine. With inflation nowadays, it might be too expensive.
too expensive. Ah, those tariffs. What do they do to us? No, I'm just kidding. We're not going to
All
get to
right.
any of that. We got too
Different
political on the
podcast.
last one. So, um, great episode, Jessamine. Thanks for unpacking this. We're looking forward to hearing you guys. We'd love to hear your feedback as well. So please keep it coming. And we will connect with you guys on the next episode.